My name's Owen. For those who've not met me, I'm the head of membership and programs, and as part of my role, I'm also the designated safeguarding lead for Woodcraft Folk. Um, I work with two other deputy safeguarding leads, Leanne and Lauren, many of whom many of you will have come across those two in their roles as well. We're going to look tonight at just a bit of a refresher on what we mean when we talk about safeguarding, what the basic definitions are, how we do safeguarding in Woodcraft Folk, how we stay safe, what are the kind of key resources and relationships that you are needing to manage and be supported by in your roles, and a little bit about how we identify and share concerns and where we get further advice. And we are gearing up to an international camp where lots of us will all be together for 10 days. It's particularly important that we work to develop that shared understanding because actually Woodcraft is a broad, I'm saying a broad church, that's hardly the right phrase, but it's a very broad movement with lots of different practices and approaches. And it's important that we have a shared core and a common understanding so that when we come together and do things together as a movement, we know that we can rely on that common core of approach and practice. So it's a particularly timely moment to be thinking about standardizing our approach across the UK. So leading on then, hopefully people will have some nodding acquaintance with what we mean when we talk about safeguarding. And we are talking about a holistic approach, an all-encompassing approach to supporting the children that we work with and their families to make sure that nothing that we do impacts on their achieving their best outcomes and developing to the best that life throws at them, but also making sure that we are vigilant and mindful of other things that are going on in their family environment, in their home environment, in their education, in their relationships with other young people, and that we are spotting and acting on and sharing appropriately anything that's relevant to make sure that child has the best opportunities. So it is that kind of holistic and all-encompassing approach to providing a safe environment for children and young people. What way people often think of when we talk about safeguarding, and safeguarding with a capital S, is what we'd actually think of as child protection. So that's if safeguarding is a wider proactive and preventative approach, when we talk about child protection, that's when we're taking action to protect a specific child or children because we know that or we believe that they are at risk of significant harm. And that's when we might be making a referral to other organisations, to statutory structures. But that's kind of like, if you like, the tip of the iceberg. If we do lots and lots of the wider preventative proactive stuff, hopefully the amount of time that we have to spend doing the reactive responsive things is lessened because we are providing a generally safe environment. But even in an environment where we're doing everything that we could and should be, we are still not in control of everything that's happening in children's wider lives, and there will be times when recognizing that there is something that gives us cause for concern is absolutely the right thing to do, and responding to it and reacting to it and passing that along to the proper authorities is also absolutely not just our legal but also our moral duty. So comfortable with that set of definitions and that distinction, particularly between the wider safeguarding approach and the reactive responsive child protection stuff. So how do we stay safe in Woodcraft? If we were doing this, in a room with flip charts, I'd probably be asking you to brainstorm these just about now. But there's lots of stuff that we do that is part of that wider approach that I spoke about. So we have named safeguarding leads. We have all of you in your local group, and we have me up here in Manchester. And we communicate if there are things that we need to share and share concerns around. That's an important part and the basis of that structure. We screen the volunteers that we put in front of children and young people. We do a DBS or a PVG check on them to make sure there's nothing in their background that suggests that they're not suitable. We ask for references, we ask for their contact details. We collect consent and registration information for the children and young people that we work with so that we know that the adults who are responsible for those children are happy for them to be with us and in our care. We talk about having appropriate volunteer to child ratios. We plan our programme in advance rather than just turning up and winging it. We make sure that first aid cover is in place so that we can respond appropriately if anything goes wrong. We risk assess activities before we do them with our children and young people, and we deliver them by using competent volunteers who are not operating beyond their level of experience. We deliver safeguarding training to our volunteers, and we recommend that they go and do external safeguarding training to make sure that they're aware of the skills and knowledge that they need to have. Where possible, in our work with children and young people, we avoid one-to-one contact between adults and young people. We keep our parents and carers informed of what we're doing with their young people in advance and after the act. And we also report and keep records of the things that we do so that we can demonstrate that we've gone through appropriate processes. So there's a whole range of things that we're constantly doing all of the time that are part of that setting a safe environment, an environment where children's right to be safeguarded and right to be kept safe is at the forefront of people's minds. And it's not to say, excuse me, that as a local safeguarding lead, you are the only person who ever thinks about any of those things at your group. Everybody should be thinking about many of those things much of the time. But if anything, your job is to make sure that it stays on the agenda, make sure it's not forgotten, make sure it's not overlooked, make sure it's given the prominence that it deserves, and keep it on the agenda. And hopefully you've all got existing networks and techniques to make sure that that happens, whether that's it being a standing item at your planning meetings or whether that's having a briefing with volunteers once a term to make sure they're all on the same page, or maybe that's a chat you have when you're inducting new volunteers into your group, or a handout that you send out when new people join the group, or whatever. Different groups will evolve different ways of making it happen. But that's your accountability as local safeguarding leads, rather than being the person who does every one of these little things. Happy so far? Good. So the key things that are going to help you in that process, we have, at the top of the tree, if you like, we have our safeguarding and our health and safety policies, which are the kind of the key things that everything else flows from. Those set out our policy, our expectation, the assumptions that we make, and the commitment that we make as an organisation. I'm not going to lie, they're not going to help you hugely to deliver your role as safeguarding leads, but they're the framework in which we operate. What is more helpful to you in your role is the procedures and guidance that sit underneath that. So, stuff about how do we screen our volunteers? How do we make sure there's appropriate first aid cover? How do we make sure that activities are safe by risk assessing them? And all of that sits on the safeguarding area of the website and in the shared drives that you should have access to. Again, that stuff is going to help you up to a point, but it's written very generically with an eye to every group everywhere in the country in every circumstance. The key bit, and this is the thing that you as a local safeguarding lead are if not the custodian of, then the champion of, is that local safeguarding plan, ideally built on the template that we've shared before. But the purpose of that document is to be, if you like, the bridge between the policy and procedure that we set at a national level and the stuff that you do at a local level, how we do it round here. So it's how you translate that policy and procedure into what you do in a drafty church hall on a Thursday evening, or when you go off to camp. And I know you've all got those documents because when you registered your group for the year ahead, you all ticked to say that you had one of those in place. And if for any reason that you don't, there's a template that sits on the website which has a series of questions that you can ask yourselves as a group, a series of things you might want to think about, and references to where all that procedure and guidance sits, where I'm taking you need to have a register of who's in your group and so on and so forth. And it will link back to the document that references that so you can see exactly what we say about it. If you've inherited that document from your predecessor, this time of year is when new people have been involved, have been appointed to those roles, where your group is perhaps just waking up from a long winter nap and is starting to think about going out and doing things and doing residentials again. It's a really good time to dust that document off and make sure it's still relevant, and make sure nothing's changed. It could be something as simple as your venue has moved the fire assembly point from the car park to the back of the kitchen, and now you need to change that bit in the thing. Or it could be that you've decided as a district to change your approach to how you do, I don't know, registration or induction of new volunteers. Those changes should be reflected in that local safeguarding plan. It should be a living, breathing document. Ditto those risk assessments for the venues and activities that you use. A word on that, which I hope isn't news to people. It is perfectly fine to have a single risk assessment document that covers your normal range of activities in your normal venue. That's absolutely fine. We don't need, oh, we're doing colouring in this week and we're doing biscuit decorating next week. Those need to be two different risk assessment documents. It's fine. If you're doing low risk activities in your normal venue with your normal bunch of people, one risk assessment that talks about the generic risks of not climbing on the chairs and not running around like lunatics with the lights off to avoid slips, trips and falls. That's fine. If you're going to a new venue, you're doing a walk in the woods or you're going to light fires in a bit of waste ground or something like that, that's the point at which you need to do a specific activity or venue risk assessment. But for most groups, for most of their activity, a single document is absolutely fine, as long as it's, again, dusted off and checked every now and again, reviewed, ideally at least every year, at least after any incident or near miss, and particularly, forms part of the induction for new volunteers and members of your group. Is shared. So that, again, like the safeguarding plan, it's a living, breathing document rather than something that's stuck in a folder and never looked at. Excuse me. All the policy documents, all the templates and links to where you can find them on our Google Drive, so you can find an editable version of that safeguarding template and so on, are on the safeguarding pages of the website, and you can get to that through woolcraft.org.uk/safeguarding. But I hope, again, that's not news to you. Increasingly, we're putting some of the things that we don't want to put necessarily and share with the entire world on an open-facing website, on the safeguarding area of the resource drive, which is part of the Google Drive. You will be automatically able to log into that and access those resources if you're logged in with either your individual or your group's at woolcraft.org.uk Google account. If not, you can request access on a case-by-case basis, and as long as I can pin down who you are, we'll grant you access to see the documents and the resources in there, which will be helpful to you in your role as well. But that link is again on that safeguarding page of the site. Cool. So the key relationships that you're talking about, the majority of you are local safeguarding leads. Many of you will also be local health and safety leads for your groups. It's not essential that that's the same person. Sometimes it's really helpful that it's a different person. But if it is a different person, then that's someone you should be working quite closely with. They're different roles, but so closely allied that often you're going to be thinking about some of the same issues. So that's an absolutely key relationship for you. Your relationship as a safeguarding lead with your group coordinator, so the named lead for your group, is also an absolutely key one. Yes, you should be championing staying safe and being a bit of a check and balance to that group coordinator and making sure that the safety and well-being of the young people is on their radar. You're also potentially a bit of a slightly independent voice. So actually, if somebody had a concern about the group coordinator or a concern about any of the other volunteers that they're working with, then they should, you should be the person that they can come to share any concerns. So you do have to sometimes, be in a position of being able to keep a little bit of separation from that group coordinator. And that can be one of the challenges of the role. Keziah has asked, you thought it had to be a different person. Do you mean you thought safeguarding lead and health and safety lead had to be a different person? It's fine, particularly in smaller groups, for them to be the same person. What we can't do is have group coordinators who are local safeguarding leads. So there have to be two different individuals in those roles. But safeguarding and health and safety can be done by the same people. It's if you've got people falling over themselves to volunteer to help out with the leadership of the group, then dividing it can mean that people can have a bit more of a focus on their area and it can involve a wider group of people, which is quite helpful to have two sets of eyes on it coming from a slightly different perspective. But that is very much down to you and the nature of your local group. Similarly, for those of you who've got who your groups are part of a wider district, all the districts that we have with multiple groups seem to work in quite different ways, depending whether you're in Cambridge or Exeter or Leeds, to take examples at random. The model in some places is that there is somebody who is a district health and safety district safeguarding lead who kind of coordinates and keeps in touch with all of that group of group safeguarding leads. Sometimes it's the same person doing that role for 2 or 3 groups in the district. All of those are fine. And again, it's just making sure that your local safeguarding plan reflects how you work together and reflects how you're going to do. Pip says, is the confusion between local, i.e. district safeguarding lead and group safeguarding lead? A local safeguarding lead can be operating at a group or a district level. The majority of our, lots of our groups are effectively lone groups or, an elfin and a pioneer group in the same level, so in the same location. So talking about that different like district and group level is effectively a fiction in all but our largest districts. I'm very happy for our large and well-established districts, the Exeters and Hackneys of this world, to work out for themselves what works. Our policies and procedures, and particularly our insurers, care about who's accountable for what's going on in that group and who the names are that are accountable for that group. District structures, where they exist, are fantastic ways to support those people, but that's not where our policies and procedures are focused. Districts, where they exist, can add value around that. And if that means that what you're doing as a district safeguarding lead is sitting at the middle of a web to make sure that people are sharing information appropriately across groups and across the district, brilliant. But that's not the reality for some of our groups that lack that complexity, but also lack that additional capacity of, experienced elder volunteers at that district level, who are not working directly with groups, but are there to add capacity. The feedback we had was that policies that talked about this kind of slightly fictional district capacity were really difficult for new groups, for smaller groups, and for lone groups to get their heads around, because they thought they were always lacking something, which is why we've moved that focus on to the accountability between effectively us at the centre and the local safeguarding lead. Can I come back to that point about safeguarding leads and engagement in the group in a bit? That's because it's a good one that I don't want to lose the thread of. So as local safeguarding leads, your line in to additional support and advice is always through me or one of the other members of the safeguarding team who make up the safeguarding leads for Woodcraft Folk itself. And you can always get us through the safeguarding@woodcraft.org.uk email address. Your local membership secretary is a key relationship because you obviously need to be helping to make sure that the volunteers that we're putting in front of young people are appropriately screened and that their references have been followed through, and that we're also having conversations and offering induction to new people who are getting involved with our work with children and young people so that they know what's expected of them. So it's a key relationship. The volunteer and training coordinator, if you've got one in your group or district, that's a really helpful person to have a line into for the same reason. And you need to be visible, you need to be approachable and contactable by volunteers, parents, carers and young people, which kind of is the time to come back to that thing about that Pip's raised about does the safeguarding lead have to be someone who regularly helps with group? It's helpful. It's important that the safeguarding lead is somebody who is familiar with the group, is in contact with the group, is able to talk about the way that the group works. Do they have to be at every session? No. It's quite common for, one of a shifting cast of characters who leads a group on a rota basis to put themselves forward to be the local safeguarding lead. They need to be available to other volunteers to be got hold of, but they don't. It's not like either the group coordinator or the local safeguarding lead, who share accountability for what's going on at that group, don't have to be at every session. It will be hard to be accountable for what the volunteers are going on if you never have any contact with the group. We've had occasions of people seemingly thinking that it's a job they can do whilst living abroad. I would say that's stretching it. It's important that you're able to be proactively part of planning and reflecting on what's going on in the group. I think it's important that you are a familiar face that is approachable and contactable by volunteers, by parents and carers, and ideally by young people as well. And that it's clear in communications around your group and its activities, who people can approach if they've got a query. And if you're a sort of remote out there, face, then it's harder for people to raise concerns. If you're fortunate enough to be in that situation of having somebody at a group level and someone operating at a district level, sometimes it's helpful to give people both sets of contacts, because there might be a reason that someone might want to leap and go straight to somebody at a district level if, for example, I don't know, their concern is about somebody who they know is very good friends with the local safeguarding lead or whatever. But you can't be completely remote, but you don't have to be totally involved. And I think the precise nature of who does it is always tempered by who's got the time, who's got the energy, and who's got the right set of skills for the job. it is, to respond to Keziah's point, yes, a membership secretary and a safeguarding lead can be absolutely the same people. That's absolutely fine as long as you've got the time and the energy to do both of those things. That would be absolutely fine. Is that clear? Do we feel we've cleared that one up? Sorry, I know it's, yeah, lots of complexities in there, but again, I'm always talking in generalities about this. I'm really happy if you want to kind of, if you've got a particular scenario playing out, I'm really happy to pick up the phone and you know, have a chat through the particular scenario you're working with, but you know, within those broad principles. So as local safeguarding leads, what is your job all about? I've sort of touched on this already, but to spell it out, at a local level, if it comes to needing to refer into to local agencies or pick up the phone and have conversations with, I don't know, safeguarding leads at the school that your young people attend or something like that, usually it will be you who's, if you're not actually doing that yourself, then you're certainly supporting the volunteers to do it. And therefore, the more familiar you can be with how the particular apparatus of the state works in your area of the country. It used to be there was just one straightforward system across the place. Increasingly now, different boroughs and different local authorities work in lots of different ways. We have multi-agency service hubs, we have single points of access, we have front doors. Every council seems to call it something different. Being familiar with and cognizant of the structures that work in the area or areas, for those of you who straddle multiple local authorities, making sure that you're familiar with that so that at the point that you need urgent support or assistance, you're not scrabbling around and going, oh, goodness me, who do we call about this again? That's a really important part of your role. Making sure that safeguarding training for volunteers is on offer. You might not be the person delivering it. You might be signposting people to it elsewhere. We do a webinar like this on a broadly safeguarding related theme every month. But making sure that safeguarding training is something that volunteers have on their agenda. As we've alluded to already, being the first point of contact for volunteers who've got concerns. Contacting the social care services if there is a child at risk of harm. Making sure that that volunteers have got access to the key policies and procedures and things like the safeguarding plan that they need to do their job and that they know what's expected of them and that's communicated to them. I say making sure they've got access to the policies. I think also making sure that they understand those policies, they've read them and that they're familiar with their contents, which depending on the context in which you work and the nature of the volunteers that you work with, might be as simple as going, have you read it? Yes, thank you very much. Or it might be running a bit more of a kind of workshop Q&A session to make sure that people are fully understanding of these documents and what the asks are of them. And again, as I've said before, effectively just keeping safeguarding on the agenda, just making sure that it's part of and baked into your planning process rather than a thing that we think of, at the end of the planning process, or even worse, we only start going, oh shit, we should have safeguarded after something has gone wrong. So that's your role to be, if you like, that champion of the focus on and the voice of young people in our activities. If you've been in any webinar with me before, you will be familiar with the contents of this slide because I come back to them a lot. But really, if we take one message away from any of the training that we do, it is that our approach to keeping young people safe only works if volunteers and others always share with the appropriate person, which is usually going to be the local safeguarding lead. Any worries you've got about individual children and who might be suffering abuse or neglect within their home or elsewhere. If you witness inappropriate behaviour of an adult volunteer or of a child in your group, or at another time that you're supervising them or responsible for them. And also volunteers who are not abiding by the policies and procedures that we've laid down and you've laid down in your group to keep people safe. Partly because procedures to keep people safe are good at keeping people safe, but also because deviating from that agreed process is not abiding by the democratic decisions that you've made about how we do things round here. It leaves us open as an organisation and puts us at reputational risk, but it also puts volunteers at risk themselves of a false allegation or of an accusation of malpractice, which isn't good for them and it isn't good for us. And that's not usually done with any malice. It's done because policies and procedures aren't clear, or because they just didn't listen the first time and they need a gentle reminder. So it's important to know when that happens and take early corrective action to make sure that it's addressed. Okay. Again, and I expect most people are familiar with this already. If a child and young person is in immediate danger, and particularly if it's in the evening, it's going to be 6 o'clock at night at your group night. In that situation, then calling 999 and asking for the police is the route to get immediate help. If you're not happy for the child to go home with the person who's turned up to collect them for whatever reason, then it is the police in that situation who are empowered to take the child to a place of safety. For any other concern that's not immediate action required, the local safeguarding lead is the route for that. It's for you to determine what the next steps are, but we're here to help you and hold your hand as you need us. I'd say 90% of time, the conversations I have with local safeguarding leads who call for advice or contact us for advice is affirming that the instincts that they've got are the right ones. Yes, it's definitely worth acting on. Yes, it's definitely worth having that conversation. Very rare that a safeguarding lead rings up and has done something or is contemplating something that I completely disagree with. But often just seeking that reassurance that, you're not making it up is helpful. And we're completely here for that. So I and Leanne and Lauren are always ready to take those calls and make time to listen to what you've seen and what's been shared with you. It's important that you keep some sort of record of that. And if you go onto the safeguarding bit of the website, there's a template for a form to record a concern or an incident or a disclosure. But honestly, just put it in writing, put it down on paper, and we can worry about the format later. But being able to log what happened, when it happened, what we did as a result is really important, partly because we may be called upon to account for the actions that we've taken in that situation. But also because we're always reviewing what we do as an organisation, how we respond as an organisation, because almost guarantee whatever you're dealing with locally, we'll have dealt with something similar before, and making sure that we're building on our experience and making sure that we're responding proportionally and consistently is also really important. So the more that we can get a picture of what people are dealing with and how they're responding locally, it really helps us to support other districts, other groups to respond and to learn from your experiences as well. So that record keeping is an important part of what we do. And if that reaches a threshold where you're making any kind of external referral, or whether you're doing more than just agreeing to kind of keep an eye on the situation, we'd really like to know about it. Not because we want to, come down and wade in and question judgment and anything, but for that reason of being able to build a picture of what we're responding to and what you need from us in terms of support. and what others in your shoes might need. Excuse me. So, for those of you who've been appointed as a safeguarding lead for the first time, or perhaps are just kind of remembering what it is that you're supposed to be doing in that role, it's a really good time with new people in the role to be reviewing your local safeguarding plan, to be renewing the records that you've got for the young people in your group. Make sure that the consent forms you've got are recent and that they, people's needs change. People get diagnoses, people's contacts change, people become capable of walking home from school from group on their own and so on. It's a really good time to renew that information and make sure it's up to date. To think about what training role holders, so group coordinators, session leaders, what they need to be familiar with what they should be looking out for in terms of signs and signifiers that a child's in need, but also your policies and procedures that your safeguarding plan covers to make sure that they're ready and able to take their place in the group. As lots of groups are beginning to think about their first residentials and overnights and even camps, remembering that residential checklist that sits on the website, which is a sort of, we're asking people to tell us about the camps and trips that they're running at least 7 days before you go off, and make sure you've got all the essentials in place. There might be reflection and learning you can do from previous activities and events. And whether you are the membership secretary or whether you just, that's a conversation you need to have and a line you need to pick up. With a mind to Camp 100 in the summer, thinking about getting ahead with volunteer screening, making sure that everybody who is helping regularly with your group is a member, has a DBS, has references in place. All of these are really good things to be thinking about in this kind of spring term. So there's a start for your to-do list if you needed anything more to put on it. The other thing that I'll commend to you is we've recently relaunched the Safeguarding Pocket Guide. So that was an attempt to have something that we can give to any volunteer who's working as part of our group. You will see it's got some basic information about things like the volunteer ratios, the things that we're always getting asked. A summary of the key principles that I've outlined about staying safe and always sharing concerns, and little places that you can put contacts for your local safeguarding leads, and also for child protection teams and things at a local level. And in the inside of that, so the standards about how we are conducting ourselves when we're in group, and how we're conducting ourselves towards each other and towards the young people. It never does any harm to provide more opportunities for people to be reminded of the standards and the behaviours that we expect of our volunteers, and putting it on the inside of that summary seemed like a good idea. It's so designed. You snip across that middle section. The idea is you ought to be able to fold it up into a little kind of 8-page booklet and put it in your pocket. But running those off and sharing them with your with your volunteers is a really helpful thing to do.